2 years ago this month, my wife and I, with our 2 young children, evacuated our home in Ukraine because of the Russian invasion. Since that day, I've traveled thousands of miles across wartime Ukraine, delivering supplies and meeting with volunteers. I've been awakened at night to the sounds of Russian missiles exploding nearby. I've received death threats from Russians for support in Ukraine. And I have friends and acquaintances who have been blinded, crippled, and killed by Russia. Ukraine is a majestically beautiful country with a rich history, but most Americans still know nothing about it. Did you know that Ukraine produced one of the world's first written constitutions in 1710 before our very own? Many of our favorite American celebrities actually have Ukrainian heritage, including Steven Spielberg, Sylvester Stallone, Dustin Hoffman, Leonard Nimoy, Leonardo DiCaprio, and the man who composed the world's most famous Christmas carol, Carol of the Bells. I have studied the history and politics of Eastern Europe for 20 years, earning multiple degrees, and I lived and worked there for 9 years with my family. So let me shed some light on exactly what is happening and what is at stake for our world. A year ago, I stood on this very spot and spoke to you about the incredible courage and heroism of the Ukrainian people. Anyone who paid attention in the first year of the war also heard these stories. But what about now? After only 2 years, Ukraine has all but disappeared from our news, from our minds, and from the halls of our Congress. Is the American will really so weak? Has our national memory really grown so short? Have we lost sight of what makes us Americans? If the free world had given up after only 2 years in World War II, Hitler would have won. So today, let me speak more plainly. The truth is that the biggest problems Ukraine has are ignorance and apathy. Ignorance because we've been fooled by Russian lies, and apathy because we have ceased to care. If we could fix those problems, Ukraine would have enough support to win the war within the year. So let us fight the ignorance that is bred by Russian propaganda and fight the apathy that festers because Americans still don't understand why they should care. Did you know that Russia is dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into a massive propaganda campaign to lie to the world? They have buildings full of people who work day and night influencing social media, controlling online bots, hiring fake influencers, and paying off politicians around the world. All of this is not speculation. This is all documented 100% fact. Putin knows he cannot win if he knows America is united against him, so he seeks to divide us. Are we going to let him control us, to distract us from our founding principles? You've already heard a lot of this propaganda because it's being vomited from the mouths of some of our very own politicians and candidates. Russian lie number one. There was a good reason why Russia invaded Ukraine. This is a lie. When horrible things happen, we naturally want to find a why. We think there must be some valid cause. Our human brains don't want to believe that such evil could happen for no good reason, because if it does, then it could happen to us, and we wouldn't see it coming. But it's time to accept reality. Evil happens, and often there is no good reason. We need to stop blaming the victim, stop making excuses for the tyrants and murderers of the world. Ukraine did absolutely nothing to provoke this war except that it wanted freedom. It wanted to be left alone. It didn't want to be controlled anymore. When someone in slavery tries to break free, it is their God-given right to do so, and it is our responsibility and privilege to support them. Russian lie number two. This war is Ukraine's fault. That's a lie. Every legitimate historian and analyst says that Russia invaded because it wants to control Ukraine, not because Russia was threatened by Ukraine. Russian lie number three, Ukraine is full of Nazis. This is a lie. Analysts and historians have studied the issue and have shown that level of support for far-right radical groups in Ukraine is so low they couldn't even get a single person into parliament. In fact, it is Russia that has a major documented problem with skinheads and Nazis. Russian lie number four, Ukraine can't win, so we might as well stop helping. That's a lie. If Ukraine had all the support it needed, it would win undoubtedly. Russia is losing troops at a ratio of at least 5-1 or higher. And Ukraine has already wiped out half of the military equipment that Russia started the war with. The problem is that Ukraine is almost out of artillery shells and other equipment it desperately needs to win because so many of our representatives have been brainwashed by this propaganda. Russian lie number 5. Ukraine is so corrupt, we don't even know where our supplies are going. This is a lie. Every single piece of equipment we have sent has been accounted for, and this has been accounted for by U.S. journalists. Every time U.S. politicians visit Ukraine during the war, both Republicans and Democrats, they have access to a registry of all military equipment we've sent. Russian lie number 6. Ukraine could end this war just by negotiating, giving away its territory, everything that's occupied. This is also a lie. When we lazily claim that we're tired of this war, that we should pressure Ukraine to negotiate away its territory, we are fooling ourselves. Putin is a nasty little thug, a bully. The more you give in to a bully, the hungrier his drooling mouth gets. Ukrainians have learned the hard way through blood and tears that every time you let Russian soldiers into a city or a village, that's when the atrocities really start. And when Russia is finally kicked out of those villages, Ukraine finds only smoldering ruins, civilian corpses lying on the street with their hands tied behind their backs and executed, bodies of women and children who were systematically raped and tortured and burned by Russian soldiers. The atrocities are so bad that one Ukrainian girl named Adelina, who was only 6 years old, her hair turned gray from the extreme trauma she faced after hiding in a basement during the attacks. Her mom said that the boulevard outside their home was completely covered in corpses. Every square meter, there was a body. You may have also heard the propaganda that we're giving Ukraine too much. This is Russian lie number 7. We're actually only giving 0.6% of our U.S. budget, and most of that goes directly back to America because we're using it to pay for our old military equipment and sending it to them and replacing it with newer, better equipment. Russian lie number 8. We shouldn't help Ukraine because we might anger Putin and he might use nukes. This is exactly the opposite of the truth. In fact, since the beginning of the war, Putin has threatened us at every step, but he knows he can't use nukes. In the beginning, some U.S. politicians thought that just sending over helmets would cross his red line, but nothing has. Every time we send more supplies, we see that Putin's threats are empty. He knows that if he uses nukes, the West has promised to step in and end the war for Ukraine. The uncomfortable truth that some politicians don't understand or don't want to think about is that if we truly fear nuclear war and we really want to make the world a safer place, the absolute best thing we can do is help Ukraine win this war. Why is that? Because when Ukraine willingly gave up its nukes in 1994, we promised that we would protect them. Why did we do that? Because we know that the more countries there are with nukes, the more dangerous the world is. We have worked tirelessly since the dawn of the nuclear age in 1945 to keep the nuclear club as small as possible. And after the end of the Soviet Union, when Ukraine volunteered to make the world safer by giving up its nukes in exchange for our promise of protection, now what? We think we can just walk away and forget about them, leave them to the wolves and the vultures? You can be absolutely sure that other countries with nuclear ambitions like Iran are watching this war very carefully. If we let Ukraine lose, if we let Putin act with impunity in Ukraine, we will be proving to Ukraine that we are liars and they cannot trust us. And the next time we're trying to negotiate with a country that wants nuclear weapons, they will ignore us and laugh in our face. They will point to Ukraine and say, "See, you won't protect us if we give up our nukes." Every country on Earth will learn that the only way to protect themselves is with their own nuclear arsenal. And then it's only a matter of time until one of those nukes goes missing or is sold to the highest bidder or is used against us or one of our allies. We need to share this message with everyone we meet. Even if you don't care about Ukraine or about what's right and wrong, you should care about this. And even if you can't wrap your head around the nuclear argument, you should know that supporting Ukraine will also make America safer and more prosperous by helping us avoid conflict generally. In other words, helping Ukraine will stop the next war before it even starts. The U.S. recently sent a delegation to Taiwan, where tensions are hotter than they've ever been before. As you know, China has repeatedly threatened to invade Taiwan, and America has promised to defend Taiwan if that happens. So you can imagine how shocked I was and impressed when the Taiwanese leadership told us that, look, we know you owe us weapons. We have already paid for them. You haven't delivered them yet. But if you have a choice between delivering those weapons to Ukraine and delivering them to us, deliver them to Ukraine, because helping Ukraine is the best way to show China that starting a war of aggression will not pay off. Stopping Russia will also help us end other conflicts. We have documented evidence that Russia is supporting Hamas, Iran, North Korea, and other maniacal dictators who are causing suffering on a massive scale around the world. Do you care about the Middle East? Then help Ukraine. Do you care about keeping U.S. troops out of Taiwan? Then help Ukraine. Do you care about keeping U.S. troops out of Europe? Then help Ukraine. Finally, as I said before, Putin claims that Ukraine is full of Nazis, and he uses that to debase and justify his regime. But let's see who really walks in Hitler's shadow. Tell me if any of these start to sound familiar. Number one, we have documented evidence that Putin has created concentration camps across Ukraine and Russia, where he takes kidnapped Ukrainians, looks for any anti-Russian behavior, and tortures them and shoots them. Number two, Putin has created a network of torture chambers in areas that Russia occupies, where Ukrainians are electrocuted, burned, mutilated, beaten, starved, suffocated with plastic bags, raped, has swastikas carved into their foreheads by Russian soldiers, and other even worse things I can't say here. Number three, Putin has purposefully bombed civilians on a daily basis, breaking the Geneva Conventions and creating war crimes, with thousands of war crimes and drones targeting schools, hospitals, bread lines, maternity wards, playgrounds, and other areas that have nothing to do with military objectives. Number four, Putin has created a massive refugee crisis with approximately 15 million Ukrainians who had to leave Ukraine in 2022. Number five, Putin has killed, wounded, or stolen 500,000 Ukrainians. And that is not including the 700,000 Ukrainian children who've been kidnapped. Often their parents have been killed along the way, have been taken to Russian re-education camps thousands of miles away, including in Siberia, where their names and identities are stripped away and they are beaten if they resist this re-indoctrination. Putin has organized the widespread destruction of Ukrainian books, churches, historical monuments, and treasures in an attempt to wipe out Ukrainian identity and history. Number eight, Russian soldiers, just like the SS in 1940s, are encouraged by the Kremlin's leadership to commit war crimes, and then they try to burn the evidence. Elliot Cohen from the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a professor at Johns Hopkins has said, "What has surprised me most is the pervasive depravity of the Russian forces in Ukraine. This is not just one bad guy. This is not just some troops out of control. The atrocities are committed by all of them." Number nine, do you remember when I mentioned that the man who composed the Carol of the Bells was Ukrainian? You should know that he was murdered by Russians in 1921 for promoting Ukrainian identity, along with many other artists and other Ukrainians. And now, 100 years later, the exact same things are happening. September 2022, the Russian soldiers occupying Kherson in eastern Ukraine tried to force the director of the local symphony to perform for them. When he refused, they shot him. Number 10, Dr. Kimberly Kagan, who is the president of the Institute for the Study of War, has said Putin seeks to wipe Ukraine away, the language, the culture, and the people. Therefore, we need to deprive Putin of his capability to fight, because as long as he has that capability, he will continue to pursue his aim. In other words, Putin will not stop until he is forced to stop, just like Hitler in World War II. Many of our lazy politicians and fake journalists do not understand this. And now our own representatives are just giving up. Our own congressmen have become morbidly and rabidly anti-Ukraine. The only way to fix it is by showing them that America does not give up so easily. We need to call them, we need to write to them, we need to email to them, and get our entire networks involved to change things. Many of us learned about the Holocaust in school when we grew up, reading books like The Diary of Anne Frank, about how innocent people were rounded up by the Nazis just because of who they were or where they lived. If you're like me, you sat in your little sixth grade desk and thought, if I were there, I would have helped. Well, now is our chance. Now is our chance to live up to the ideals we held when we were younger.
Woo!
We will not be shamed. If our younger selves could see us now, would they be proud? As Thomas Paine said in 1776, these are the times that try men's souls. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. The price of freedom is constant vigilance. Miep Hees, the woman who helped hide Anne Frank and her family from the Nazis, once said, doing the right thing might not change the war, but it will change you. It will remind you what is right. One day this war is going to end, and you're going to have to live with yourself. Let us support Ukraine, not only because it's right, but also because we must prove to ourselves and to the world and to our children that America still stands for freedom, not only in words, but in action.
Act for Ukraine, right? Act for Ukraine.